Hello everybody! Today we're going to be creating this calculator app in React and Tailwind. So you can see it's a simple calculator. We can multiply things and divide them and add, subtract, and then we can clear the screen and we can do a %, basically just dividing by 100, and we can take a square root. Okay, so first we're going to be implementing all the styling for this with Tailwind CSS and React, and then we're going to actually be implementing the logic. So to get started, if you want to follow along, you're going to need Git on your system, and you're going to need Node.js. Head over to my GitHub repo for this project, copy the link here with code, HTTPS, and copy. And then to clone the repo, to get started, you can do a git clone followed by the URL. You can do single branch, and then start. So what this is doing is you're cloning the start branch, which is just a good starting point for this project, and the master branch would just be the final calculator here. Okay, let's clone it, and now let's open it up in our code editor. So we'll do code React calculator. So let's have a look at what we have here. All the coding we're going to be doing is in our app.jsx, so this is where our actual calculator lives. To start the app, we need to install all the dependencies. You can do npm install to do that. And then to run it, you can do a npm run dev, which will run the development server. And if we click this link here, it'll open up our app. So there's nothing here right now, and that's because in this starter template, we don't have anything. We just have this container, which just set this background color, and then this calculator, which is what we're going to be implementing. So for example, if I write testing in the middle of this calculator, you can see it shows up on the screen. So now, how are we going to implement this calculator? We first need to add the buttons. There are a total of 19 buttons. So I'll go ahead and add 19 buttons with all the different things that we need. Okay, so I've gone ahead and added all these buttons that we're going to need. They don't do anything yet. There's empty buttons, and I've put all the different labels I want for these buttons. Some of these you see have a yellow square around them. This is just here because these are not the characters you might think they are. So this isn't an X, this is actually the symbol for multiplication, and this is not just a regular minus, this is a special minus symbol, which is a little wider and will look a little better on our button. The next thing we want to do is align these buttons into a grid, and to do that we can use a CSS grid, or in Tailwind there's a utility class for that called a grid. So I'm going to surround all these buttons in a div, and then give a class name to start styling this, and I'm going to say grid, and then I'm going to say grid calls for. So what this does is just align everything in here into 4 columns, and then however many rows that is needed. Okay, so this looks starting to look more like a calculator. Let's also add some gap between the buttons. So right now they're really close together. I can do that with gap and some number, so I'm going to use 4, which is 16 pixels, or 1 rem. So now everything is a little more spaced apart. Maybe let's do 5 here. I'm also going to add some padding around, or space around, the outside of the entire calculator. To do that, I can go up to our parent div here and say p for padding, and then some number. So let's say padding 5. I also want to round these corners a bit. So to do that, I can use rounded, and let's say 2 extra large. Next, let's start styling the buttons themselves. To do that, we can add also a class name to one of these buttons. And let's say we want a background. So instead of just being a white background on the button, we want a light gray background. To do that, we can say bg dash, and then Tailwind has all these colors built in you can use. What we're going to use is gray dash 100, so a light gray kind of color. Okay, so now this has become a gray background on this C button. We also want to add some padding here, so let's do py maybe 3. Okay, so now we have some padding on the top and bottom, so the Y direction of this button. I also want to make this button a square. So to do that, I can say aspect square. So that will just keep the aspect ratio of this button as a square. But let's also round this one. So again, same as before, we can do rounded to extra large. A few other things I can do to make this look nicer. I can add a shadow around this button, and that's really easy to do in Tailwind. You can do shadow dash. I'm just going to do a small shadow, right? And if you notice, there's a little bit of a shadow around it. Looks like the button is popping out. Let's also go ahead and change the color of this text. Often with these things like this, it looks nice if you make the text have a little less contrast, which doesn't look as nice as if we do a slightly lighter color. So I'm going to go ahead and change the text color with the text utility class, dash, and then we can again pick any one of these built-in colors in Tailwind. Text gray 600. Okay, so now the text is a little lighter, which I think looks nice. So now the button looks great, but it doesn't really feel like a button, because when we hover over it, we don't get any indication that this is something we can click on. So to add some kind of feeling that this is a button, what I'd like to do is have something happen to change the style when I hover over the button. To do that with Tailwind, I can say hover, colon, and then whatever styles I want to happen when I'm hovering over this button. So in this case, I would like to make everything just a bit darker when I hover over. And a great easy way to do this is with brightness dash. So let's go with brightness 95. Now when I hover over, the button becomes a bit darker. I also want to change my mouse cursor when I hover over. So to do that, I can do hover, colon, and then cursor dash. I'm going to go with the pointer cursor. So now when I hover over, my cursor changes this familiar cursor pointer, which is used for buttons and links. The last thing I want to do, or almost the last thing I want to do, is when I click on this button, I want to also have an indication that I'm clicking on it. So to do this, I can say active, and with this active property, I can style when the button is active or being clicked on. So let's just make everything a bit darker, so brightness 90 instead of 95. So now when I hover over the button, it gets darker, and when I click on it, it gets even darker. Okay, one last thing I think I'll do to make this button look extra nice is add a bit of a animation. So right now when I hover over the button, the brightness is instantly becoming 95% of what it is by default. Instead of doing this instantly, it's nice to have a bit of a transition. So that's really nice in Tailwind. It's super easy to do. You can just say transition, and then you can do a dash, and then what you want to transition on. So you can transition on only the shadow, or you could do opacity and so on. I'm just going to transition everything. Just to be really clear what's going on, I'm going to make this transition very long, which I can do with duration followed by a number. So if I do duration 100, you can see when I hover over this, it's going to change from brightness 100 to brightness 95 over a 1 second period, so 1,000 milliseconds. Okay, but this is too long, so let's actually just go with duration of 100. Okay, so now this is working well. Okay, so now I want to apply this style to all of these buttons. So what I could do, what you might be tempted to do, is just go along and copy all this style and paste it on all the other buttons. And that will work, but we're going to be repeating all this style 19 times. Our file is going to get really large. It's going to get annoying to edit things because if I wanted to go ahead and modify now maybe the background color, I'm thinking, oh, maybe I should do background gray 200 instead. Well, then I need to go ahead and edit it on every single one, which is a bit annoying, right? So instead of repeating ourselves 19 times, we're going to do things the React way, which is to make another function, what we call a component in React, which just manages this button. So we're going to make a special function, which is a component for our calculator button. So to do that, it's really simple. All we have to do is make a function, call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it a calculator button. And this function will just return the button. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these styles. And then I'm going to replace all of our buttons with these calculator buttons. You can see we have a bit of a problem here though. Everything is a C instead of all the different labels we put in here. And the reason for that is our calculator button is just always putting a C in the side of this button. What we actually want to do is put whatever was passed in the inside of the calculator button into the button. Okay, the way you do that in React is you make your calculator button accept an object as a parameter. And inside that object, we want to dereference a property called children. So this children will be passed to this function when we put something inside the button, so the component. And then instead of putting C in here, we do squiggly braces, and then we put children in there. So now you see this will work. So you may wonder why we have the squiggly braces. If we don't have squiggly braces and we just put children, then React doesn't know that we're trying to access this variable children. It will just literally put the word children in all our buttons. Okay, now our calculator is looking pretty good. Let's just make a few small adjustments. I think I want to make all these buttons bigger because I'm actually still quite zoomed in. So I'm going to go ahead and make the text bigger. I can do that with, let's say, text 3 extra large. And let's make this padding larger. Let's make the roundedness a bit larger too. Okay, that looks reasonable size to me now. The next thing I'd like to do is all of these buttons right now look the same. But in our final calculator, you saw that we had different colors for some of these buttons, which made it look a little fancier. So let's figure out how we can do that. So let's start with the C button. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to define a class name on this calculator button, which will overwrite the class name that we have defined here. Basically what we want to do is say a class name here, which is a background which is red, and then we want the text to be red of, let's say, 400. But this isn't going to do anything, and the reason it doesn't do anything is up in our calculator button, we're not doing anything with this class name property that we've passed to this, this function. So the way we can get this property is if we also destructure not just the children property, but also the class name property. Right, so now we'll have access to class name, so this value inside this function, and then we need to add it to the class name that we have fixed here. So the simplest way you can try to do this, and this is going to cause issues later, but for now, what we can do is just literally add the string to this other string. So we just append this class name to this other class name, and this will work in this case. All right, so now we have this nice red button, but all the other styles that we've defined are working. So let's go ahead and modify all these other special buttons with their different colors. Okay, now I've gone ahead and added all these nice accent colors to our buttons. The next thing you'll notice is that our 0, what we'd like is for our 0 to actually span 2 columns here rather than just 1. And that is actually really easy to do. All we need to do is go ahead and add a different class name to our 0, and that class name is the call span. So the number of columns you want the thing to span, and instead of 1, which is the default basically, we want 2. Okay, so now our 0 spans 2 columns, but we have another problem here. So because we had aspect square up here, this 0 is also going to be a square, which is not what we want. We actually want this 0 to be a rectangle. So what you need to do to fix this, usually, is you would set the aspect not to square, but to the default value of auto. Okay, but this isn't going to work. So if we go ahead and say aspect auto, nothing happens. And the reason nothing is happening is if we go ahead and inspect our 0, and look at the styles it has. So we have aspect square, and then we have aspect auto later. But the aspect square is winning over here. So even though we defined both styles, it's actually the aspect square which is being applied. So the problem is, when we're adding our class name, when we're trying to override the default styles in this component, we're just appending it. which doesn't always actually work to overwrite the style. It will work for like background colors and things like that, but with the aspect ratio, if I have aspect auto and then aspect square, the aspect ratio will end up being square. Fortunately, there's a really nice library that does exactly what we want here. It's called Tailwind merge. So to fix this, what we can do is we can install npm install Tailwind merge, and then we will go ahead and import the function twmerge from the library we just installed. And now instead of appending these strings with the plus symbol, what we'll do is we'll call this Tailwind merge function that's provided to us in this library. And we'll call it with the original string we have, and then the class name which we want to kind of overwrite these default styles with. Okay, now let's run the app again. And we see that it works now. So why this worked was that if we go ahead and inspect the 0 button now, you'll notice that the aspect square is gone away. We still have aspect auto, but we don't have aspect square. And that's just because Tailwind merge is being smart and noticing that we put an aspect auto after an aspect square. So in order for that to work, it needs to get rid of the aspect square here. The last thing we need for the actual appearance or UI of our calculator is we need to add a place to display the result. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add a div above our grid of buttons. For now, let's just put a 0 in here. And to style this, we'll give it a class name. Let's also make this a background of gray 100. Let's give it padding 4, or maybe less than that. Let's make the text on the right, so we can do that with text right. By the way, you can see what actual CSS is being applied by all these styles. So text right is just doing text align right. And then let's also go ahead and make this text bigger. So text, let's go with 6 extra large. Let's make everything rounded again. Now let's add a bit of space between the bottom of our display and all our buttons. Margin with M, then bottom with B, and then some number. And now for the final touch, we want to add the same shadow which we had on our buttons, so shadow small. Okay, and now we have the display of our calculator all finished. Now what we need to do is actually implement the button. So right now, clicking doesn't do anything. To do this, we're going to need to add some variables which our calculator stores. And the way you have to do that in React is with something called useState. That lets you keep track of a variable, and it's not just going to reset every time that React runs our function to actually render this out onto the screen. So for example, if I say the current value that is in the display here is an empty string, and then I put the current value here, or let's say 1, 2, 3. So let's add another button. And on click, what it's going to do is going to say current value, and going to add a exclamation mark to it. So here we have our button. We click it, and nothing happens, right? So just to test that this is actually working, I do alert working. Right, so I click here. We did click our button. It's working, but the UI isn't being updated. Right, there's 1, 2, 3. We don't have any exclamation marks. So what's going on here? So what's going on is, in order to render this calculator to the screen, React has basically called this function, and then it's gotten all this HTML here, right? And then it's put this HTML onto the screen, onto the DOM. But when I call current value plus equals this multiply or this exclamation mark, React doesn't call the function again. So React isn't like recalling this function with the new value of current value, right? So React doesn't change the UI just because I clicked this button. Furthermore, even if React did rerun the function, like so let's say I set current value plus exclamation mark, so now it's 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark. Even if React did then rerun the calculator, when it reruns the calculator, it's going to reset current value just to 1, 2, 3. So it's never going to update to 1, 2, 3 exclamation mark. So you can't just use a regular variable like this and modify it in React and actually get the modified output on the screen. So in order to do this, React gives you a tool, and that's the use state. So we need to import our use state function from React. And now, instead of doing current value plus equals exclamation mark, we use this special function that React gives us, which is set current value, to modify. So we'll do current value plus exclamation mark. So now if I do click me, let's remove the alert. Now if I do click me, every time I click, I get a new exclamation mark in here. Right? And so how this works is React is managing these special variables I want to keep track of separate from this the local state of this function. So even if React runs this calculator again, it won't reset the current value to its initial value. It'll keep track of what the previous value was the last time it ran this function. So now let's go ahead and get rid of this button. And now let's start implementing these buttons. So when we click them, we want to append whichever button was clicked to the current value, which should be shown in the display. Let's add a function for that. So let's say handle decimal click, and this will accept the decimal that is being clicked. So we'll do handle decimal click, and let's say I'm clicking 1, then I'll call handle decimal click for 1, and let's actually pass it just a string. So I will be a string here, and what we'll do is we'll do set current value, and one trick you can do here, instead of saying current value plus I, which is essentially what we want to do, we want to just append whatever button was clicked to our current value. There's a nice way to do this. Instead of passing this set current value function a value, we can pass it a function. And so the function we're passing here is it takes a previous value and it just adds I to it. Okay, and so now when we click the number 1, what we would like to do is we would like to do an on click and a handle decimal click and with the string 1. Okay, but when I do this, nothing's going to happen. And so this is the same problem we had before, because I'm passing an on click to my calculator button, but the calculator button is not doing anything with any property called on click. So what I could do is just add on click here, and then add on click equals on click to my button. A nice way to do this though is instead of just adding this property once, and maybe if I need some other property like disabled, I'd also have to add that and add all the other properties. I can actually add them all at once if I do ... and then rest, or I can call this anything I want. All this is going to do is collect all the other properties other than the ones we've destructured here, children and class name. It's going to collect them into their own object, and then what I can do is pass all these other properties to the button. So I can ... rest inside these curly braces, and this will just take anything else I passed to the button and actually put it on the button. So now if I press 1, I actually get what I want. I'm going to go ahead and add these on-click handlers to all the other buttons that need it. Okay, I've added all the on-click handlers. So if I refresh the page and start adding buttons, it will work. Okay, I'd also like my clear button to work. So I'm going to make another function called handle clear. And all this will do is set the current value to an empty string for now. So let's go ahead and go to our C and say on click is handle clear. So when I click, it'll clear the output. I can go ahead and also implement the percent and square root. So all that'll do is either divide the current value by 100 or take the square root of the current value. So now if I hit percent, I'll divide by 100. If I hit square root, I will get the square root. Now everything will get really big because this number suddenly becomes very long. But we're going to deal with that a bit later. The next thing we'd like to do is actually implement all these other operator buttons. So if I do 5 plus 5, I want to get 10, but they're not doing anything. So to do that, I think we're going to need to add another state variable, or another 2. And what we're going to need to keep track of is both the previous value that the user typed in. So if they hit 23 plus, then we need to store that 23. And we also need to store that we hit the plus sign. So let's create a state for the previous value and set the previous value. And let's initialize this to an empty string. And let's set the operation, so op and set op. And again, initialize this to an empty string. Okay. So now when I handle clear now, I also want to clear the previous value and the operation. So let's clear those two. And now when I hit one of the operators, I need to do something. So let's make another function called handle op. And it's going to take the op that we're handling. And then what we need to do here is we need to store the op, store the value that the user has currently typed in as the previous value, and then clear the current value. So set the op to whatever the user passed in, set the previous value to the current value, and set the current value to an empty string. And now let's go ahead and actually add this handle op to all our operations. Okay, I've added all of those. So now if I hit any of these ops, the current value will disappear and everything will have been stored. So now what I want to do is if I do 2 times 2, if I hit equals, I want to actually display the result of the calculation. So we need to also now implement the function that will run when we hit the equals button. So function handle equals. And what do we need to do when we hit the equals? Well, we need to take the previous value and the current value, and then we need to perform whatever operation we were storing there. So we'll need if the operation is the division symbol. So if the operation was division symbol, then what will we do? Then we will set the current value to current value divided by, so previous value divided by current value. And then we'll also want to clear the previous value. Set the previous value to an empty string, and let's also clear the op, reset them. So if I do 1 divided by 3, then hit equals, it won't do anything because I haven't attached this to the equals button yet. On click, handle equals. So 1 divided by 3 equals, and we get this 0.33333 and so on. Okay, so now we need to do basically the same thing for all the other ops. Okay, so now everything should work. 12 plus 5. Oh, okay, so we haven't actually done this properly. So you can see if I do 12 plus 5, I'm getting 125. And the reason that's happening is I'm just adding the string 12 to the string 5, which is not what I want to do. What I want to do is first parse this string 1, 2 to a number, and then I want to add 5 to it. So here what I can do is I can do parse float to turn this into a number, and then I can add them together. And I should do the same thing for all these other. Okay, now if I do 5 plus 5, I'll get 10 as I expect. Okay, so now everything is working. The only thing I'd like to fix is I want to make this display nicer, right? So right now we're getting huge display when the number is very large. So if I do square root 2, then I'm getting all the decimals. We're going to make a function called handle display, which is just going to actually format this number in a nice way. So, and here, instead of putting current value in here, we're going to put handle display. And so the first thing I'd like to do is I don't want to put nothing here if we don't have any value. I'd like to just put 0. So to do that, I can say if current value length is 0, and then I'm just going to return the string 0. Otherwise, let's just do what we were doing before and return the current value. Okay, and we need to actually call this function. Okay, and so now when we clear the screen, we get 0 instead of this just disappearing and getting smaller. So the other thing I'd like to do is, instead of just putting current value here, what I can do is parse it as a float. Right, so this was a string, but I'm making it a float instead. And then I can do toLocale string. And so this is a built-in JavaScript function on a string that will basically parse it and show it in a nice way depending on where the user's locale is set. So since I'm set in Canada, I get commas every basically 3 places, but depending on your location, you might get a dot, or you might get it every 4 locations, and so on. And the other thing that's nice is it will limit the number of decimals that are shown. So we'll basically not have problems with our calculator getting super large. Okay, another problem we have is if I hit dot immediately, then I get this NaN. And the reason that is happening is because it's not happy parsing a float when the value is basically just dot. So what I think I want to do about that is, if the current value is just a single dot, then I'll just show 0 point. Right, so if I type a dot, then I'll show 0 point, and then that'll work. And so now we basically have a working calculator with JavaScript, React, and Tailwind. So if you like this video, go ahead and leave a like and a comment, and let me know if you have any other things you'd like to see me implement, especially with JavaScript and Tailwind and React. So I'll see you guys in the next video.